Anybody else wanders in, they'll have to catch up, or we'll have to catch them up. My name is Paul Reynolds, and I'm one of the two associate directors of the Bone Student Center and Braden Auditorium at Illinois State. I have been at Illinois State since January. Before that, I was at Texas A&M University Corpus Christi for about 6 years. Before that, I was in the private sector for about 2 years, managing a lodging hospitality firm. And before that, I was at the University of Pennsylvania for 8 years. And that's where I kind of started my professional career. This session grew out of a chapter that I was asked to write for a book called Enhancing Student Learning Through College Employment. And it is a publication that ACUI has for sale. It's a shameless plug. I don't get any money for it, but basically you're getting at least one chapter's worth of information in this session. So to start out talking about, most student employment programs are either, in my experience, either they are happenstance, and so they're just kind of loosely glued together, or there's some intentionality behind it. And so some of the things that I'm going to talk about during this session are about intentionality and being deliberate about your student employment programs. And a couple of reasons to reach for intentionality is accountability, better results. It makes the process easier on everybody if everybody knows what's going on. It makes it more relevant to what's going on in the world today if you have a better organized program, and it bridges the gaps, or bridges the gap with academics as well. One of the first things that everybody needs to do when they are looking at either recreating a student employment program or creating a student employment program from scratch is kind of come up with a shared philosophy. So it really starts with the nuts and bolts of, what's our philosophy of the student employment program? What are we hoping to achieve from this program? And some ways to do that are to talk about the program during regular staff meetings. One of the ways that we did it when I got to Illinois State, there was a student employment program in place, but we have about 300 student employees, and there's 5 or 6 departments within our department. And so every department had their own rules. Every department wrote up students for different infractions, for different things. What we were hearing was, well, man, I could just go work for that department if you're going to be that tough on me, and wouldn't have to deal with this. So part of it is talking together with the full staff about what we want to do with the program, what we want to see from it. And then one of the things that we did was we actually created a student employment task force. And so what I did was I kind of handpicked and plucked people from all of those departments, including a couple of students, to sit on a task force. We met every week from about February through June. And every week we basically came up with a list of things that we needed to talk about at the very beginning that everybody agreed with, and then we kind of just dissected that information as we went through all of those ensuing weeks. And one of the other things that you can do that really, and this is again how it helps you to tie your program back to the academic world, is to choose a theorist and look at the student development theory, and then make sure that your program is rooted in that, so that what you're doing is working at achieving the goals of that student development program. And for our case, we chose Arthur Chickering. We really liked the 7 vectors of student employment or student development, and we actually have applied those theories. We handed out to our students at the beginning of the year what those vectors were and what we were trying to get at. And we liked them because, Chickering's vectors are, you can move into one vector but move backwards. It's not completely linear. You don't have to get to this step before you can move to this step, so you can do a lot of skipping around, and which I think is more realistic, because I don't think that any of us necessarily take one exact path. Some things to consider I guess we could go back. Some things to consider when you're working on, especially developing a student employment program, is whether the program is going to be centralized or decentralized. And that obviously could take on a lot of different meanings depending on what kind of campus you're on. But for instance, we have a centralized program, even though we've got 5 or 6 sub-departments that work for our department. We have a centralized way of processing those employees. We have one person in the business office who is kind of the point person in terms of whenever a student is hired, there's a process so that the supervisor fills out a form, an electronic form, that then gets forwarded to her, as well as a bunch of other people to do notifications on things such as creating email accounts, name tags, the business office to do the processing for the I-9 and the W-2 verification, all of that kind of stuff. So, and because of the particular circumstance that we're in at ISU, we have the ability to kind of do our own thing. And so from a macro level approach, I guess from a university-wide approach, we have a very decentralized system in that we can do our own stuff as long as we're paying minimum wage. Really, that's the bottom line. That's the only thing that we're required to follow, I mean, I guess in terms of policy or procedure. But then if you look at our department as a whole, we have a very centralized approach to the administration of student employment in that we've got all of those things in place so that all of those departments are now processing employees in the same way. The rules are all the same. The students are brought together as a group at the beginning of every year to hear about about our department. We do some training, some base level training with all students before they necessarily get trained with each one of their individual departments. So in our case, from a more micro level approach, we have a very centralized process. One of the things that you can do when you're creating or redeveloping a student employment program is to consider relationships. And you can basically think about what I would encourage you to do is to think about what other departments are impacted or could have impact on you in developing or redeveloping a student employment program. So thinking about financial aid, thinking about the bursar's office or payroll or human resources, all of those kinds of places, not only does it help you to think about what their impact is in your program, but it actually helps you to create relationships across the university, which is kind of a sub-goal of doing your student employment program, or it could be a sub-goal of creating a student employment program. And then obviously consider a decentralized model, which means, you know, all of these areas across campus are all doing different, they're doing their own thing, but they're all using all of these, you know, payroll and financial aid and that kind of stuff. You know, in most cases, most universities don't know that you have the option of decentralized or centralized. It kind of is what it is. You can change things and develop things, but the macro level, how it is set up is probably how it is set up. I don't know that you're going to be able to change that unless, of course, you're in human resources or financial aid where you could kind of affect kind of overall positive change. The employment cycle. So this is a little bit more nuts and bolts about what does the employment cycle look like or what should it look like. And basically, if you start up, I guess you would start up here in the yellow. This recruitment and hiring is kind of where you're starting. You're moving into orientation then, meaning employee orientation, going into area-specific training, shared input and recognition, so that's kind of like making sure that your employees that you have a recognition program in place and that they have some input into how your program is running, and some things that you could change to better the program or some things that you could eliminate from the program. And then obviously evaluation is very important, and we'll talk about each one of these things. And then obviously the cycle goes back around and you start all over again. Recruitment and hiring. This is kind of the definition of recruitment is any activity associated with the solicitation of students to work within your employment program. And a rule of thumb that I've found is to begin to solicit potential candidates at least 1 month prior to the time that you want them to start. And that will become apparent for a couple of different reasons. We don't necessarily need to read all of these, but some actual recruitment activities might include working with career services, human resources, financial aid, advertising on campus electronic signage, posting the job with your current student employees. That's really important to make sure that they all know what's available. Putting up banners in your union or other buildings on campus, posting the job in your community or off-campus locations which students regularly visit. If the position is above an entry-level student employment position, post the position with all of the lower-level student employees so that you're encouraging job growth. And then obviously the possibilities are really only limited by what options you have. Narrowing the applicant pool. A couple of things to think of in terms of how you can narrow the applicant pool. Obviously, you want to look at previous employment experience and how this person is going to fit into your organization. You might want to consider grade point average. We have a GPA requirement for our students. We have a 2.5 for all students, a 2.2 for all students and a 2.5 for any manager level students. And then looking at their skills or abilities learned in previous employment positions. Schedules, obviously that's very practical. Do they meet your needs? Longevity, one of the things to really consider, and one of the things I always think about is if we can get, if we can get freshmen in our door and working, and we can keep them happy, we've got them for 4 years, and that cuts down significantly on the amount of turnover. So obviously go towards the youngest ones, and then you can help also mold and develop them, and they're not necessarily so set in their ways either. And then other campus involvement, obviously you want to look at things in terms of are they involved in other campus activities, but you don't want someone who is overly involved and that can't give your position the time that it deserves. Interviews, and the reason that it's got 2 exclamation points is because I found that in my research that many people around colleges and universities, especially student unions, student activities, they basically say we're hiring, somebody fills out an application, if there is an application, and they get hired. And so that's, I think, setting a bad tone from the beginning. I think that there needs to be a formalized process where you post the position, you take applications for a certain amount of time, and you're very clear about when do those applications need to be in by, so that, again, you're helping. Part of the whole point of this is you're helping students to also understand what it's like in the real world and what it's like to have to follow rules and be on time with things and that kind of stuff. That should be part and parcel of your entire program, is developing them so that they're ready for real world experiences. So the other thing that interviews does, I don't care if you've got one person and you've got one position and clearly that's the person you're going to hire. Again, if you interview them, it increases the psychological kind of value of the position because they feel as though there's a process that they have to go through. And it gives them real world experience. Interviewing with you might be the first time they've ever interviewed for anything. So it's something to think about. And I feel the same way about references. Make sure that you have your students at least, or on your application, at least have 2 references. And if they say, well, I've never worked anywhere before, which I've heard before, it could be friends, it could be a pastor or somebody that they've been involved with on a volunteer basis, something so that they get, again, used to having to think about those things. And if they don't have references now, they need to start thinking about that with their professors and other people that they're working with. And then obviously you make an offer, and one of the things that we do is we even include an offer letter, much like professional staff get, so that in the offer letter it's very clear what is their title, what are the expectations of the position, what's their pay rate, any kind of probationary periods, discipline issues, that all that stuff is kind of included in that appointment letter. And it's a welcome letter, and it's saying welcome to the family, and again, it feels a little bit more robust. This is a sample interview assessment form. Oops. Basically, I guess it's not going to do it. It is small, and it's just to kind of give you guys an idea of what it looks like. At the end, you're going to see a link, and what I'm going to do, it's not there yet. The link is there, but all of the forms and stuff that we're going to talk about today, I'll make sure on Monday or Tuesday that I post so you guys can go get them and look at them more specifically. But kind of just a quick kind of overview. Tell us about yourself, and then it goes from unacceptable to excellent. And if we were to ask a previous supervisor, what would they say about your? I can't even read that myself. Your greatest strength. And then you can ask about greatest weaknesses. What does customer service mean to you? Now, again, you can have an interview assessment for a general interview assessment for all of your student employees, or you can have an interview assessment for specific employees. This was actually for a search that we were doing on a graduate assistant. But you could have different questions based on different positions. This is talking about orientation, which is once you get them hired, going through an orientation and making sure that they have a good feeling of what's going on in your department, what the rules are, student employment manuals, all of that kind of stuff. This is just to give you an idea. We have a student employment checklist so that when the people in our business office are going through and processing students in, that there's a very kind of delineated, we've got to do this, we got to do this, we got to do this, we got to do this, so that a step isn't missed, or that we're making sure that we include everything. And then obviously you're moving after orientation and after you hire them in general orientation, you're obviously going to move them into area-specific training. A big thing to remember is that students learn differently. Give some thought to ensuring that learning tasks take place via the 3 learning methods, being auditory, visual, and kinesthetic. So make sure that you've got some thought into, it's probably not a good idea to have all of your training reading. It's probably not a good idea to have all of your training just doing stuff and not any reading. So making sure that there's a mix of those things. The role of the senior student employees, again, this is an opportunity to develop your program more fully, to have your lead student employees or your student managers or the most senior level student employees take charge of helping to do the training. Making sure that you're clear about training expectations. We're going to see something about that in just a second. And then learning outcomes. And one of the things that we've all heard about more and more is that we're being asked to kind of, I don't know if defend ourselves is the right word, but certainly to make sure that people know our worth and the credibility that we have. And so tying your program, your student employment program, to some learning outcomes and saying in advance, this is what you will learn during your employment with us. And then basically making sure that they take a pre-test and a post-test, so that there is something when they come in your door that's establishing kind of their level of understanding of a lot of different things, and then making sure that you're giving that post-test when they're graduating or they're moving on to another position, and so you can then show the differences in what they've learned between the time that they started with you and the time that they're ending. And this is actually a sample. Again, you don't need to read the small print, and you can get this from the web on Monday or Tuesday. But this is a sample training matrix that we have set up. This is for a cashier in the box office. So basically what this is doing is it's basically going from the job description. So we're talking about bullet points from the job description, and then getting a little bit more specific in terms of what are the actual tasks that they need to learn how to do. And then this section over here is left for, well, some of these things you might take more than one day or more than one session, or you might need to repeat what you're training them on a couple of different times. And so this is giving you an area to put the date that you did that with them, and then who was the trainer. Because one of the important things to remember is that for the most part in student employment, one person is most likely not always the person that's going to be training. And so especially if you're involving your senior student employees, a person may be going through and learning certain things from one person, and then the next time they work, it's kind of like, well, where are we in your training, and what did they tell you about this, or well, this helps kind of track that, so that if you've been with the person for a couple of hours one day, you can, and this is actually about 10 pages long. This training matrix right here is about 10 pages long. So all of the training materials are in that one document, and it gives you a very good sense of moving the person through the process. And one of the things that we say at the very beginning, they get their training matrix, and we say, you're responsible for this, and you're responsible for making sure that this gets filled out by X date. And we pick a date, usually about 2 months, and say, in the 2 months' time, all of those spots should be either checked off or filled in, and that's when you can get, sometimes we actually offer a raise, an end of the training period raise. And so in order to be even eligible for that end of the training year raise, or end of the training raise, you've got to have this filled out. And so it puts the onus on them to make sure that when they come in, they've got the training matrix, that they're looking at it and thinking about what more do I need to learn, where do I need to go now, and that kind of stuff. So it puts some of the onus on them to be responsible for that. Shared input and recognition, that was one of the arrows kind of towards the bottom. This Beth Baker of the Washington Post asserts that encouraging employee input into decision making and building strong workplace teams enhance both employee well-being and productivity. Obviously, this goes back to that we all know that we each individually feel more invested if we're asked our opinions and if we feel a part of the process. And that's basically what that's saying, is that we need to involve the students in this process and ask them how things are going and what's working and what's not working. And one of the ways that you can do that is to have a student advisory committee. You can set up a group of students, and it could be a group of 3 students, it could be a group of 5. Obviously, it really depends on how large your organization is, but you can set up an advisory committee to kind of give you feedback. You can structure the advisory committee, let them know what activities you want them to be doing throughout the year, give them materials to actually evaluate the program. That's one way to do it. Obviously, again, get your senior student staff involved in developing training tools and in the actual training, because again, that's an area that you're fleshing out and making, you're giving those students the ability to learn how to train people, which is important. And encourage fresh ideas and encourage people some informal drop-in time, or some time where they can just stop by and say, hey, you know, I wanted to talk about this, or you know, I read through the manual and, you know, there's something in there that doesn't make sense and I wanted to see if we could change it, or something like that. The Recognition Professionals International state that employee recognition is the application of scientifically confirmed behavioral psychological principles. Employee performance and retention are strongly linked to consistent, appropriate, positive reinforcement of behaviors that promote the organizational goals. And so one of the things that is very important is to make sure that in your, I don't know if you want to call it a performance plan or a disciplinary plan. I've seen it both ways. In our current situation, our director didn't like discipline being in the title and wanted to be a little bit more positive. So our entire disciplinary program is actually a performance program. And so we're trying to focus on the positives, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Performance recognition must be swift and regular in order to be effective. So, you know, obviously you want to do evaluations, but you don't want to wait until the evaluation to talk to the employee about everything that they've done good and everything that they need to improve on. You want to have things in between now and then. And hits and what I was going to talk a little bit about hits and misses. We have a program that basically, and I think I can show. Yeah, and again, you don't have to squint to read the small print, but what we have set up, and this is something that I've developed over probably the course of 20 years, we have set up a progressive disciplinary or progressive performance and disciplinary and reward program. And what we have is and I'm sorry I didn't bring any, but we have quarter sheets, and they're in triplicate. The quarter sheets are printed up with, you know, a blank for their name, their department, and it's got a space on there to identify whether this performance is negative, meaning we call them misses. We kind of base it on baseball. Hits are good, misses are bad. And so if an employee is, for instance, late to work, they get a miss. And this form gets filled out. If it's not filled out by their supervisor gets a copy, it goes to the business office, it goes into a database. What happens is that the person with the most hits at the end of the month gets Employee of the Month, and they get $25 added to their paycheck as a bonus. Over the course of the year, those hits are added up and the misses. What happens is if you get a miss, let's say for being late, but you've called, and again, that's why that's what this missing a required meeting without notice, well, you get 5 misses and you get an automatic write-up. So there's a behavioral performance document that we've got that's basically our write-up. That's the next step to the quarter sheet. So the quarter sheet, you're going to get 5 misses right away and you're going to get a performance document. Those performance documents don't go away. But if you, for instance, missed a required meeting with notice, you said to your supervisor in advance, I'm not going to be able to make that meeting, and the supervisor says, well, I'm going to have to give you 3 misses for that because in advance you got to be at all of our meetings. If they get 3 misses, but let's say the following week they come in and they pick up a shift with short or no notice, well, depending on the time, they're going to get, depending on how much time that is, they're going to get 1 to 3 hits. So let's say that they got 3 hits. Those 3 hits will cancel out those 3 misses. So there's a way for us to kind of give them feedback on a regular basis about their performance, and there's a way for them to, when they've kind of fallen down and done something that's not so good, there's a way for them to redeem themselves and kind of cancel out those misses. With the exception of once you get 5 and get written up, that's not going away. So you can't get rid of that. The plan or the program is that we've basically made because we're trying to make the input regular and swift and more regular, I don't know how else to put it. You now have more chances to do good things and to slip before you're ultimately terminated or suspended. And so what we've done is we've said, well, you get up to 5 misses and you're going to get a write-up. You can get up to 5 misses again, you're going to get a second write-up. You get up to 5 misses again, the third write-up is termination or suspension or something like that. So, but the employees who are getting the most hits every month are again getting that $25. The one person that gets the most gets the 25. So it becomes kind of a competition. And then at the end of the year, the person with the most hits gets $250. So there's a $250 cash benefit. Any questions so far?
How often do you guys, it says missing a required meeting, how often are those required meetings?
It depends on the department, it depends on the sub-department within our organization, but some groups have meetings every week, and some groups have meetings once a month. So, yeah.
During your recruitment and hiring stage, you said that a few things that you should look at is previous employment and then their class standing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if they're freshmen, and most departments are encouraged to hire freshmen because they do have those 4 years, do you take the risk because they've never had previous employment? Or
Yes.
do you just kind of...
I would. Because I think that, again, what you're looking for, what you can look for there is kind of, well, what have you been involved with in high school? And think about other volunteer activities or clubs and organizations or, that kind of stuff. I think that speaks to, is this student a go-getter or is this student at least, will they grasp what we have to give them? Because molding a student is much easier than dealing with a student, I think, that is, like I said, set in their ways or has a bad attitude. So to me, attitude is everything. If they've got the right attitude, honestly, you can train a monkey to open and close the building. It's the customer service skills and the intangibles that are really important, and the attitude, I think, plays a huge role. And then moving through the employment cycle to evaluation and separation. Obviously, I've talked about this before, but the impact of regular and routine employment evaluations is paramount to ensuring that employee development is occurring and that students are afforded the opportunity to learn from their mistakes and improve their performance. And regular and routine, again, and it says slams and kudos there, and this is a good place for me to talk about this just real briefly. In my previous position at A&M Corpus Christi, we called them slams and kudos. So if you did something wrong, you got a slam. Kudos were obviously good things. Here, there was some opposition to the word slam because some people felt it was violent, and so we changed to hits and misses. I don't know. but anyway, you can call them whatever you want. When I started this program at the University of Pennsylvania back in probably 1992, somewhere around there, I cannot remember what we called the negatives, but the positives were actually called mitzvahs. And the reason that anybody know the word mitzvah? It's a Jewish word. There's a large Jewish population at the University of Pennsylvania. And a mitzvah is basically like a do-good, something that a lot of Jewish kids grow up, their families give them mitzvahs, and they give them little gifts or something if they've done a chore or something right. Yeah, go ahead.
What's the determining factor between a suspension and termination, and do you feel that it's consistent through your program?
Fortunately, I don't think that I've had a lot of suspensions or terminations in this program because, again, we've put enough safety nets into place that hopefully we're getting them, when they're doing things wrong, we're able to counsel them more quickly on the spot and say, okay, this is the expectation. And especially if they get one of those employee performance documents or the behavioral modification documents, it's going to be very well spelled out in there. Over the next X months, we expect that you will have no other infractions in this area or whatever. And in general, I would say that takes care of it. Obviously, from my perspective, I think that is a supervisory call, and that's one of the ways. A lot of times, as we were going through and redeveloping the program at Illinois State, a lot of the supervisors were like, they thought at first that I or the committee was trying to strip them of their discretion and of their ability to make decisions and for student employment decisions. And one of the things that I kept saying, and I think we've stayed true to, is that although we're putting some guidelines into place, there still is significant discretion, even in the awarding of slams and kudos or hits and misses, whatever you want to call them. That's why there's a range. So if you do something in a particular category, we've said you can get 1 to 3. So really, based on the supervisor's view of what they've done, they can get anywhere from 1 to 3. So there is a little bit of room for negotiation there. And then ultimately, if it came down to a suspension or a termination issue, it really would have to depend on what the infraction was. If it was somebody that stole something, they're going to be terminated immediately because that obviously we can't tolerate. But if it was, they've had, for instance, if they've had some issues with getting to their morning shift on time, I, as a night owl, have particular affinity towards people who don't like mornings, so I might be a little bit more lenient in that area if it were me personally. But I might also say, look, you've got this amount of time, and you cannot. It's important when you're working shift work that you're here on time, and the building's got to be open on time, and all of those kinds of things. So it really, in my mind, would be up to the individual supervisors in our department to talk with either Michelle or myself. Michelle and I are both the associate directors, so everybody either reports up through me or up through her. So if we got to a suspension or termination issue, one of us would probably be called in, and we would have a discussion about, what's best for this student, and then how do we match that with what's for the department. Regular and routine helps final and complete. Great create evaluation forms that match job descriptions. Goals are essential and exit interviews are important. And here you'll see a sample of 2 evaluation forms, kind of 2 different ways. The A&M Corpus Christi way kind of looks a little bit more akin to the training matrix that we looked at before. So this says uniform attendance, initiative, attitude, dependability, awareness. So there are some very broad-stroked ideas, and then giving them a rating from 5 to 1 in each of those areas. And here we still see a Likert scale being used, 1 through 5, and an the U is, there's no basis for judging that area. But this says quality and quantity of work, attitude towards work, departmental policies, dependability, relationships with people, initiative and resourcefulness. And again, this is just the first page of a couple of pages of evaluations. But and I'll tell you that these evaluations have kind of been this is very much based on the full-time evaluation at 8 a.m. Corpus Christi, and this is very much based on the full-time evaluation at Illinois State. So there's, that's why they look different, and so just wanted to give you an idea that it doesn't matter so much the content of each one of your evaluation, but that you're actually doing them and that you're doing them regularly. One of the things that we do is in December, we pull out this form and we kind of sit down with each one of our students. Every supervisor sits down with each one of their students and kind of goes through this form and says, if it were May, this is what I'd give you. So you now have an opportunity from January through April to correct any deficiencies or anything like that. And then in May, we're going to actually fill this out. So they get mini evaluations as December, and then they get their full evaluation at the end of the spring. This is just a sample exit interview form so that you can get a sense of, why is someone leaving your organization? And there may be a trend that you're not aware of, and if you actually start to employ an exit interview form after you've had a certain amount of students leave your program over time, you can actually go back and tabulate that data and have a feeling or be able to pinpoint something that you may not have been able to pinpoint before. So it just gives you, and again, some of my staff said, well, what if the student is terminated and we don't, they're not on the best of terms with us. They're not going to sit down and fill this out for us. Well, you could fill it out for them. You could say that they were terminated and put the circumstances surrounding it or whatever so that it's able to be tabulated. Process and procedure development. This is a sample of a job description just to get you guys to understand that every position within your union or activities organization needs to have a job description. It needs to be very specific about who the supervisor is, what the starting pay is, kind of a summary, then their responsibilities, and then the qualifications. It could include other things, but these are kind of the basic minimums that every job description should have. Thinking about process and procedure development, make sure that you have employment manuals. And this is an area, again, that you could really utilize senior student employees. So if you, for instance, have scheduling as part of your operation, you could usually have one of your scheduling students sit there and think through whatever program they use, whether it's EMS or R25 or something like that. They can actually put together some materials that the company might have, along with kind of some processes of how they actually process reservations or something. So thinking about that, it's really important for your organization to at least have a general employee handbook so that these are the policies and procedures that everybody in this organization are going to be bound by. It doesn't matter if you work in the box office or the bowling and billiards center or if you're a student manager on the floor. These are the policies and procedures. So things like dress codes, the hits and misses program or the progressive disciplinary program, call-in procedures if they're going to be sick, scheduling, things that are applicable to every student employee across the board. And then obviously, so that's the department or general employment manuals. Then there's position employment manuals. So for each specific position, you can have manuals, and then you can also have a daily manual or a checklist for specific areas in your operation. Can I get a time check? Anybody know what time it is? Okay, I'm running out of time. Pay plan and equity considerations. Think about how your positions relate to each other and how they're paid. When I got to ISU, I can tell you right now that there was a student manager in the student center who were making, I can't remember if it was more or less, but it was like $1 more or less than a student manager in the bowling and billiard center. And so the question came, well, why is there this disparity between positions? So it's important to kind of line up all of your positions and then look at what you're paying them, or at least the range or the spread of what you're paying them, and then seeing, does it make sense? And kind of going back through it and either banding or grading positions. And the caution down there is just, one of the things that we ran into with this, and I think that other people are running into this, as we continue to see increases in minimum wage, what's happening is that as we increase our scales or we increase our positions, we're slowly starting to encroach upon those lower level either professional positions or your classified staff like custodians and housekeepers and that kind of stuff. So it's really important when you're thinking about this scale that it makes sense in and of itself with each of those positions together, but also that it makes sense overall with your overall organization, and how do you do those kinds of things and make sure that there's equity. This is just a sample pay band structure, so you can kind of see that, and this was from A&M Corpus Christi actually, but we had a level 1 employee through a level 5 employee. If they were in their first year, this was the hiring rate. This was after 160 hours, which was our training period. We said, if you work 160 hours and you complete that training matrix that we talked about before, they all got basically a quarter raise. So there was some incentive to complete their training in a timely fashion. This is the second year, so this raised 50 cents. Third year raised 50 cents. Fourth year raised 50 cents. And this is the average, kind of the average of those rates together. Now, some positions, as what we've done at ISU, is we've said, you know what, for a cashier position, we expect them to move into, if it's a cashier in the box office, we expect them to at some point move into a student manager position. And so we capped the pay plan at 2 years for those people. So you could stay in the position for 4 years, but after the second year, you're not going to get raises in your third and fourth year. We expect you to kind of move into a management position or a position where there's some other growth. So those are some things to think about. Scheduling. Three main variables to consider: your routine needs, your special needs, and then the student schedules, and making sure that those things mesh together. There is some, or there should be some discussion with your organization on the philosophy of appropriate level of work hours. Basically, you know, at our institution, as long as they work under 40 hours, there's no problem. Nobody has a problem with it. At other institutions I've been, if you went to 21 hours, you'd get your hand slapped or you'd get talked to. So a lot of that obviously depends on the individual institution that you're a part of. But basically what this says is that according to the American Council on Education, research shows that students who work 15 or fewer hours per week, either on campus or in a field that supports their degree, has a positive effect on persistence and degree completion. So 15 or fewer hours on campus or in something that they're specifically think they're going to be using in the future. So this is ammunition for you, for all of those people who say, well, I can just go out and get a job at, you know, McDonald's or whatever. Unless they're in food service, there's some issues there in terms of persistence and graduation rates. So there's some ammunition for you here. When to work. For those of you who, has anybody in here used When to Work? It's a web-based scheduling software. It is phenomenal. I'd encourage you, we don't have time to talk about it today a lot, but we use it. It is a subscription-based service based on the number of student employees that you have in your program. It's a tiered rate system. I think for 300 student employees, we pay something like $800 a year. The beautiful thing is that it's web-based. Everybody can get to it no matter where they're at. You can basically fill in your shifts, you can put all your positions and then build shifts for each position. Then your employees, when you put your employees in, you say, well, they're capable of being a student manager, they're capable of being this, and that, whatever positions they're allowed to work. What happens is once you get your schedule built, you hit autofill, and it takes their schedules, which you've inputted, and matches them with your schedule that you need, and you no longer have 15 or 20 schedules sitting in front of you trying to work that schedule out. It is amazing. It's cut down significantly on the number of hours that our staff spends scheduling. So the website is, and I'll put this on the page on Monday or Tuesday when I get back as well, but the website is whentowork.com, and it is, like I said, it's a phenomenal website, and it's hugely helpful. Timekeeping and payroll varies from school to school, but they're very but at the very minimum, departments should require handwrite time cards or something that you may have a computerized timekeeping system or something like that. And then thinking about who's responsible for that. Conclusions and recommendations. Communication is key. Students must be actively engaged in the learning process. Learning outcomes are essential. Review and review again. So as your program evolves, think about it again and think about how it's changed and how other things that are affecting it have changed. Student employment, alumni programs, that's something to think about, especially with the onset of social networking media like Facebook. It would be great to build camaraderie and a loyalty back to the institution if you come up with a student alumni program. And then share, share, share. So as you develop and find things that work for you, then I would encourage you to come back to conferences like this and share with your other colleagues. And you know, that's the way that we all get better at what we do. This is the document sharing. So if you want to write this down, this is where I'm going to put all of the documents. Like I said, when I get back to campus on Monday, I would say give me until the middle of the week, but if you take down that website, all of those evaluations, the hits or misses will be there, the job descriptions, all of that, everything that we've talked about, I will make sure that is here, as well as the when to work. I think I did, I guess not. I don't think I'm connected now. Questions? I know that I blew through it, but
Can you go back to the document share slide so I can-
sure. Oh, sorry. Mm-hmm. Sure. And again, for those of you who are interested, the information that I presented today came out of a chapter that I wrote for the book Enhancing Student Learning Through College Employment, which ACUI has on sale in their bookstore online. So this was from one chapter. Is everybody done with writing that website down? If you want to look real quick, other chapters in that publication are right here. So student development theory is a backdrop for employment, personal growth, employment and academic achievement. So there's a lot of good stuff in this book. And I actually brought 2 copies of the book with me today for people to look through, and I can't find them. I thought they were in the car. They're not in the car. I don't know where they're at. So they're in my room somewhere, obviously.